In the quiet suburb of Willow Creek, Colorado, Laura Whitmore stares at the small digital watch lying on her kitchen table, its cracked face frozen at 9:47. 20 years have passed since her 8-year-old son Ethan vanished from a sleepover just 3 blocks away, and for 2 decades, she had clung to the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, he was still alive. But last Tuesday, when contractors renovating the Peterson house pulled up old floorboards in the basement, they discovered something that would shatter that hope forever and reignite one of Colorado's most haunting missing child cases. The watch, with its distinctive Batman logo and the tiny scratch on the band that Laura remembered so vividly, had been hidden beneath those wooden planks for 20 years, waiting to tell its terrible story. Detective Greg Simmons, who had worked the original case as a rookie officer, received the call at 6:23 a.m. on a grey October morning. The voice on the other end belonged to Dan Reynolds, the construction foreman who had made the discovery. "Detective Simmons, you're going to want to see this," Reynolds had said, his voice shaking. "We found something at the Peterson place on Oak Street, something that shouldn't be there." Simmons had driven through the crisp autumn air, his mind racing back to 2003 to the case that had haunted him throughout his entire career. Ethan Whitmore, bright-eyed and full of life, had simply vanished during what should have been an ordinary sleepover with his best friend Ryan Peterson. The boy, who loved Batman comics, collected hockey cards and dreamed of becoming a firefighter, had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a family forever changed. The Whitmore family had never been the same after that October night in 2003. James Whitmore, once a successful accountant with a ready smile and weekend plans filled with soccer games and family picnics, had transformed into a man consumed by an endless search. He had posted flyers on every telephone pole in 3 counties, driven countless miles following up on tips that led nowhere, and spent his savings hiring private investigators who promised answers but delivered only more heartbreak. Laura had channeled her grief differently, becoming a fierce advocate for missing children, organizing search parties, and maintaining a website dedicated to Ethan's case that she updated religiously every week for 20 years. Their marriage had somehow survived the unthinkable stress, held together by their shared determination to find their son and their younger daughter Olivia's need for stability. Olivia, who had been only 4 when her big brother disappeared, grew up in the shadow of Ethan's absence, surrounded by his untouched bedroom, his photos on every surface, and parents who never stopped hoping. The family had endured false leads, cruel hoaxes, and well-meaning but misguided psychics who claimed to know Ethan's whereabouts. They had appeared on television shows, granted interviews to journalists, and cooperated with law enforcement agencies across multiple states. Every phone call brought the possibility of news. Every knock at the door, the chance that Ethan might be standing there, older, but still their boy. The years had etched lines of sorrow into their faces, but they had never given up hope until now. Until a construction crew working on renovating the Peterson house for its new owners had discovered that tiny watch, Ethan's watch, hidden beneath floorboards that hadn't been disturbed in decades. The discovery came about by pure chance, a twist of fate that seemed almost cruel in its timing. The Peterson family had moved away from Willow Creek just 6 months after Ethan's disappearance, unable to bear the weight of what had happened in their home and the suspicious glances from neighbors who whispered behind closed doors. The house had sat empty for years before being sold to a young couple who had no knowledge of its dark history. When the new owners, Scott and Nicole Bennett, decided to renovate the basement into a family room, they hired Reynolds Construction to update the flooring and electrical systems. Dan Reynolds had been working in construction for 35 years and had seen his share of unusual discoveries hidden in old houses. Everything from vintage coins to love letters from decades past. But on that Tuesday morning, as his crew carefully removed the aging hardwood planks, the glint of metal caught his eye. Nestled in the dusty space between the floor joists, partially covered by insulation that looked like it had been recently disturbed, lay the small digital watch. Reynolds immediately recognized its significance. Everyone in Willow Creek remembered the Whitmore case, remembered the frantic searches, the media attention, and the way the entire community had rallied around the grieving family. He had called Detective Simmons immediately, then carefully secured the area to preserve any potential evidence. The watch was photographed in place, then carefully extracted and sealed in an evidence bag. Simmons's hands had trembled slightly as he examined the timepiece, noting the distinctive Batman logo that had been mentioned in every missing person report, every news article, every plea for information that the Whitmore family had made over the past 2 decades. Ethan Whitmore had been the kind of child that every parent dreams of raising. Born on a sunny June morning in 1995, he had entered the world with curious eyes and an infectious laugh that could brighten any room. His kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Callahan, still remembered him as the boy who asked endless questions about everything from why the ocean was blue to how bridges stayed up. Ethan was fascinated by fire trucks, spent hours building elaborate block towers, and could recite facts about every dinosaur species. He collected hockey cards with the dedication of a serious investor, organizing them by teams, years, and player statistics in binders that he treasured. His best friend, Ryan Peterson, lived just 3 houses down Oak Street, and the 2 boys were inseparable, spending their afternoons riding scooters, playing board games, and planning adventures that took them to every corner of their safe suburban neighborhood. Ethan was the big brother that every little sister adored, patiently helping 4-year-old Olivia learn to tie her shoes and always saving her the marshmallows from his hot chocolate. He played youth soccer, loved hiking in the nearby mountains, and was counting down the days until Halloween when he planned to dress as his hero, Batman. His parents often marveled at their son's combination of boundless energy and genuine kindness, the way he befriended shy classmates and always stood up for younger children on the playground. Ethan's 3rd-grade teacher had called him a natural leader, someone who could make friends with anyone and had a gift for making others feel included. The Whitmore family's life had revolved around Ethan's activities, James coaching his soccer team while Laura volunteered for every school function and class party. They were living the American dream in their comfortable 2-story colonial house, complete with a white picket fence and a Labrador retriever named Max. On the 15th of October, 2003, that dream became a nightmare that would haunt Willow Creek for the next 20 years. Ethan had been excited about the sleepover at Ryan's house, his first overnight stay away from home that wasn't with grandparents. Laura had packed his overnight bag carefully, including his favorite Batman pajamas, his toothbrush, and the digital watch he had received for his 8th birthday just 5 months earlier. The watch had been a special gift from his grandpa Whitmore, who had saved up for months to buy his grandson something he would treasure. Ethan wore it everywhere, proud to finally have a real watch like the older kids at school. James had walked Ethan to the Peterson house at 6 o'clock that evening, carrying the boy's sleeping bag and overnight bag while Ethan skipped beside him, chattering excitedly about the movies they planned to watch and the games they intended to play. The Peterson family seemed perfectly normal, a working-class family with deep roots in the community. Tom Peterson worked at the local hardware store and coached youth basketball, while his wife Susan was a part-time receptionist and active member of the PTA. They had 3 children: Ryan, who was Ethan's age, 12-year-old Jessica, and 16-year-old Kyle. The family lived in a modest, split-level house with a fenced backyard and a basement recreation room where the boys planned to set up their sleeping bags. James had chatted with Tom Peterson for a few minutes, confirming the pickup time for the next morning and exchanging phone numbers just in case. Everything seemed routine, normal, safe. When James called to check on Ethan at 9 o'clock, Susan Peterson assured him that both boys were doing fine, that they had eaten burgers for dinner and were settling in to watch a movie. That was the last conversation anyone would have about Ethan Whitmore while he was still alive. The morning of the 16th of October began like any other autumn day in Willow Creek, with golden leaves falling softly in the crisp air and the promise of a beautiful weekend ahead. Laura Whitmore had planned a special day with Ethan, including a trip to the apple orchard and dinner at his favorite diner. She had woken early to prepare his favorite breakfast of blueberry waffles, humming softly as she worked in the kitchen. At exactly 10 o'clock, the agreed-upon pickup time, James drove to the Peterson house to collect their son. But when Susan Peterson answered the door, her face was pale with confusion and something that looked disturbingly like fear. She explained in a trembling voice that when she had gone to wake the boys that morning, she found Ryan sleeping alone in the basement recreation room. Ethan's sleeping bag was empty, his overnight bag still packed exactly as Laura had arranged it. The Batman watch that never left his wrist was missing along with him. Tom Peterson had immediately searched the entire house, calling Ethan's name, checking every closet, every cabinet, every possible hiding place. They had looked in the backyard, the garage, even the neighbors' yards, thinking perhaps Ethan had wandered outside early and become lost or disoriented. But there was no trace of the 8-year-old boy anywhere. The family had called the police at 9:15 a.m., 20 minutes before James's scheduled arrival, and officers were already on the scene when James pulled into the driveway. The next several hours passed in a blur of questions, searches, and growing panic as it became clear that Ethan had simply vanished. Detective Greg Simmons, then a 26-year-old officer with only 3 years on the force, was assigned to assist the lead detective on what initially appeared to be a case of a confused child who had wandered away from an unfamiliar house. But as the hours turned into days, it became terrifyingly obvious that Ethan Whitmore had become the victim of something far more sinister. The original investigation consumed the Willow Creek Police Department and drew resources from state and federal agencies as the search for Ethan intensified. The FBI's Child Abduction Rapid Deployment Team arrived within 48 hours, bringing specialized equipment and expertise in missing children cases. Every member of the Peterson family underwent extensive questioning. Their home was searched multiple times, and their backgrounds were investigated thoroughly. Polygraph tests were administered, though the results were inconclusive and couldn't be used in court. The basement recreation room where Ethan had last been seen was processed for evidence, but investigators found no signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. The boy had simply disappeared from a locked house in the middle of the night, leaving behind no trace except his absence. Ryan Peterson, Ethan's 8-year-old best friend, was questioned gently by child psychologists and victim advocates, but his story never wavered. He remembered falling asleep while watching a movie around 10 o'clock with Ethan right beside him in his sleeping bag. When he woke up the next morning, Ethan was gone. The boy showed no signs of deception or hidden knowledge, and mental health professionals concluded that he was telling the truth as he understood it. Kyle Peterson, the 16-year-old son, became a person of interest early in the investigation due to his age and potential access to the house during the night. However, multiple witnesses confirmed his presence at a friend's house across town until well after midnight, and security cameras at a nearby convenience store showed him there at 2:30 a.m. Jessica Peterson, the 12-year-old daughter, had been spending the night at her grandmother's house and was never considered a suspect. The parents, Tom and Susan Peterson, submitted to repeated questioning and searches, their lives dissected by investigators looking for any hint of involvement in Ethan's disappearance. As word of the watch discovery spread through Willow Creek last week, the entire town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for answers that had eluded them for 2 decades. Detective Simmons, now a seasoned investigator and head of the department's major crimes unit, assembled a team to re-examine every aspect of the original case with fresh eyes and advanced forensic techniques that hadn't been available in 2003. The watch was sent to the State Crime Laboratory for DNA analysis, fingerprinting, and trace evidence examination. Simmons personally drove to the Whitmore home to inform the family of the discovery, a conversation he would later describe as one of the most difficult of his career. Laura Whitmore's scream of anguish upon seeing her son's watch echoed through the house, a sound that seemed to carry 20 years of suppressed grief and desperate hope, finally crashing into devastating reality. James Whitmore sat in stunned silence, turning the evidence photos over and over in his hands, studying the familiar scratches and wear patterns on the watch band that proved beyond any doubt that this was Ethan's treasured timepiece. Olivia Whitmore, now 24 and working as a nurse in a neighboring town, drove home immediately upon hearing the news, rushing to comfort parents who had spent her entire adult life searching for her brother. The family huddled together in their living room, surrounded by 2 decades worth of missing person posters, newspaper clippings, and photographs of a boy who would never grow older than 8 years old. Detective Simmons explained that the discovery of the watch beneath the Peterson house floorboards meant that Ethan had almost certainly never left that basement alive, and that his case was now officially being investigated as a homicide. The realization that their son had been murdered in the very house where they had trusted him to be safe sent shockwaves through the Whitmore family that were felt throughout the entire community. The investigation took a dramatic turn when forensic analysis of the watch revealed traces of DNA that didn't match Ethan Whitmore or any known member of the Peterson family. The genetic material was entered into the national database, where it generated a hit that sent investigators racing to follow up on a lead that would crack the case wide open. The DNA belonged to Nathan Carter, a 43-year-old man with a criminal history of child endangerment and sexual assault who had been living in Oregon under an assumed name for the past 15 years. Further investigation revealed that Carter had been working as a handyman in the Willow Creek area during the fall of 2003, doing odd jobs and home repairs for various families, including several on Oak Street. Phone records from October 2003 showed that Susan Peterson had called Carter's number just 2 days before Ethan's disappearance, inquiring about basement waterproofing work that she had been considering. Carter had reportedly visited the Peterson house to provide an estimate on the 13th of October, just 2 days before the sleepover, giving him intimate knowledge of the home's layout and the basement area where Ethan had been sleeping. When investigators attempted to locate Carter at his current address in Portland, they discovered that he had fled his apartment 3 days earlier, taking only a few personal belongings and leaving behind a hastily packed residence that suggested he had been planning his escape for some time. A nationwide manhunt was immediately launched with Carter's photograph and information distributed to law enforcement agencies across the country. The breakthrough came when a gas station attendant in Tucson recognized Carter from television news coverage and called police. Carter was arrested without incident at a budget motel, where investigators found detailed newspaper clippings about Ethan's case and a disturbing journal that documented his obsession with the Whitmore family over the past 20 years. The confrontation that followed Carter's arrest would provide the answers that had eluded investigators for 2 decades, though the truth proved to be more horrifying than anyone had imagined. During his confession, which was videotaped and later played in court, Carter described how he had returned to the Peterson house in the early morning hours of the 16th of October, using a basement window that he had deliberately left unlocked during his visit 2 days earlier. His original plan, he claimed, had been to steal valuable items from the house. But when he encountered Ethan sleeping in the basement, his darker impulses took control. Carter admitted to suffocating the 8-year-old boy with a pillow when Ethan began to wake up and threatened to scream. The confession revealed that Carter had hidden Ethan's body in a crawl space beneath the basement stairs, an area so small and concealed that investigators had missed it during their original searches. He had then pried up several floorboards, placed the boy's watch beneath them as a grisly trophy, and replaced the board so carefully that the disturbance was virtually undetectable. Carter had left the house before dawn, driving Ethan's body to a remote area of national forest land, nearly 100 miles away, where he buried the child in an unmarked grave that he claimed he could no longer locate. The investigation of Carter's apartment revealed disturbing evidence of his continued obsession with the case, including photographs of the Whitmore family taken from a distance over the years, suggesting that he had stalked them long after Ethan's murder. Most chilling of all was Carter's admission that he had returned to the Peterson house multiple times over the years, even after the family moved away, using his knowledge of the basement layout to enter the property and relive his crime. He had been in the house as recently as 2018, he claimed, checking to ensure that his evidence remained hidden. The arrest of Nathan Carter brought a measure of closure to the Whitmore family and the Willow Creek community, But it also opened fresh wounds that 20 years of uncertainty had never quite allowed to heal. Laura Whitmore spoke publicly for the first time since the discovery of Ethan's watch, her voice steady, but her eyes filled with tears as she addressed the media gathered outside the courthouse. She spoke of the relief of finally knowing what had happened to her son, but also of the devastating grief of learning that Ethan had died so young and so frightened, alone in a basement, just 3 blocks from home. James Whitmore stood beside his wife, his arm around her shoulders, as she thanked the investigators who had never given up on Ethan's case and the community members who had kept their son's memory alive for 2 decades. The family announced their intention to establish the Ethan Whitmore Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing children and funding advanced forensic techniques that could help solve cold cases. Olivia Whitmore spoke movingly about growing up as the sister of a missing child, describing how Ethan's absence had shaped every aspect of her life, while also inspiring her to become a nurse who could care for and protect other children. Detective Simmons, visibly emotional after 20 years of carrying the weight of the unsolved case, praised the Whitmore family's strength and patience while acknowledging that justice could never truly compensate for their loss. The Peterson family, who had lived under a cloud of suspicion for 20 years, despite being cleared early in the investigation, issued a statement expressing their sorrow for the Whitmore family and their gratitude that the truth had finally emerged. They revealed that they had moved away from Willow Creek, not just because of the trauma of what had happened in their home, but because of the whispered accusations and suspicious glances that had made their lives unbearable in the community where they had been born and raised. The trial of Nathan Carter became a media sensation that gripped the nation. But for the Whitmore family, it represented both the pursuit of justice and the final painful chapter in their 20-year ordeal. Carter pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a life sentence without the possibility of parole, sparing the family the trauma of a lengthy trial while ensuring that he would never be free to harm another child. During the sentencing hearing, Laura Whitmore read a victim impact statement that brought tears to the eyes of hardened court officials and spectators. She spoke of Ethan as a bright, loving boy who had trusted the world and been betrayed by the darkest corner of human nature. She described 20 years of birthdays, celebrated with an empty chair, Christmas mornings that began with grief instead of joy, and the constant ache of not knowing whether to hope or mourn. James Whitmore spoke of his guilt over allowing Ethan to go to the sleepover, a burden he had carried for 2 decades, despite knowing rationally that he couldn't have prevented what happened. Olivia Whitmore, speaking publicly about her brother for the first time, shared memories of the big brother who had protected her from monsters under the bed, never knowing that the real monster would take him away from her forever. The court also heard from other victims of Carter's crimes, revealing a pattern of abuse and violence that stretched back decades and included at least 2 other unsolved disappearances that were now being reinvestigated. Carter himself showed no remorse during the proceedings, staring blankly at the families whose lives he had destroyed while offering no explanation for his actions beyond the clinical details of his confession. The judge, in handing down the life sentence, called Carter's crimes among the most heinous he had encountered in 30 years on the bench, noting that the defendant had not only murdered an innocent child, but had compounded that evil by allowing the victim's family to suffer uncertainty for 20 years. As autumn returns to Willow Creek once again, the leaves falling just as they did in October 2003, the Whitmore family begins the slow process of healing that they could never fully begin while Ethan's fate remained unknown. The house on Oak Street, where the Petersons once lived, has been purchased by the city and will be demolished to make way for a memorial park dedicated to Ethan's memory and all missing children. Laura Whitmore has returned to her advocacy work with renewed purpose, traveling the country to speak about the importance of never giving up hope, while also acknowledging the reality that not every missing child will come home alive. Her message to other families facing the nightmare of a missing child is complex but honest. Hope is not always rewarded, but it is always necessary, and the love that drives the search never dies even when the worst fears are confirmed. James Whitmore has struggled more visibly with the resolution of Ethan's case, finding that the answers he had sought for 20 years brought not peace, but a different kind of pain. The agonizing knowledge of his son's terror and suffering in those final moments. The family has sought counseling to help them process their grief, which had been frozen in time by uncertainty, but now flows freely in all its devastating fullness. Olivia Whitmore speaks of feeling like she can finally mourn the brother. She never really had the chance to grieve, having spent her entire remembered life searching for him rather than accepting his loss. The community of Willow Creek has rallied around the Whitmore family once again, just as they did 20 years ago, organizing fundraisers for the Ethan Whitmore Foundation and volunteering for its mission of supporting other families in crisis. Detective Simmons, now approaching retirement, says that solving Ethan's case represents the most important achievement of his career. But he is haunted by the knowledge that it took 20 years to find answers that might have been discovered sooner with better techniques or different decisions. The breakthrough in Ethan's case has led to renewed investigations of other cold cases involving missing children, with several departments across the country requesting assistance from the team that finally brought Nathan Carter to justice. In a final bittersweet twist, the Whitmore family has received hundreds of letters from families dealing with their own missing children cases, finding both comfort and responsibility in the knowledge that their long ordeal might help others find the strength to continue their own searches for answers that may never come.